Before we jump in, drop a quick hey down in the comments. Sounds tiny, right? But it seriously boosts how YouTube spreads this story to fellow sci-fi dreamers like us. I'm hyped to see who's vibing with this one. Following years of decaying defenses and the absence of any credible military shield, Terra has been officially classified as unclaimed ground, wide open for multi-species relocation, effective now. The declaration sliced through encrypted networks like a razor, ignoring security walls, hijacking every transmission across the Sol system. One sentence: cold, precise, delivered in eerily perfect Terran dialect by a voice too smooth, too artificial. Inside the marble-walled chamber of the Terran Unity Assembly, silence reigned. Dozens of Earth's senior delegates, seated like statues around the midnight black obsidian table, stared at the glowing hologram spinning above them, an emblem forged from 6 interlaced insignias, each belonging to a dominant species within the Galactic Concord. Archminister Corvin laced his fingers, his chin pressed to his knuckles. "They didn't even bother to ask," he whispered. Opposite him, Defense Envoy Brax Winton kept his gaze locked on the emblem. "They haven't asked us anything for 2 decades. Across the chamber, Diplomat Rian Voss tugged at his collar, wearing the kind of neutral frown only diplomats can perfect. "We'll draft a formal objection." Silence answered him. No one believed it would matter. The Concord didn't wait for consent when they enforced the covenant of Sarah. They weren't waiting now. High above Earth's surface, orbiting platforms shimmered with alien brands. Skeletal harvest rigs, painted in sterile hues of silver and emerald, crawled lazily through the upper atmosphere, draining energy straight from Terra's magnetic belt. Beneath the oceans, mechanized arms bristling with bioalloy tendrils scraped along the seabed, churning silt as they seized Earth's remaining resources. Their hulls bore the etched crests of the Verati Syndicate and the Krexel Dominion. Across every skyline, transmission pylons flickered with signals from distant worlds. Human cities pulsed beneath the weight of quiet occupation, bought and sold by off-world syndicates. The central display in the assembly chamber blinked again, this time showing the Concord's crest one last time before fading into a silent wall of static. No one mentioned rebellion. No one truly believed rebellion could happen. 3 million kilometers away, orbiting a frozen moon lost in Saturn's shadow, something rippled. A tiny tremor across the rings. Almost invisible. Almost. But not to everyone. Aboard the Sereth watch station, tucked neatly inside a rangy pocket beyond Saturn's edge, Sentinel Officer Prek, a tall, sinewy Dravashi with pale azure scales and trembling sensory fronds, squinted as a crimson glyph shimmered across his console. Uncharted gravitational surge, localized and irregular. Prek clicked his fronds in concern, tapping the glyph with one long, ridged digit. His second in command, a broad-shouldered Bralkari named Uvax, leaned in lazily. Probably just ring turbulence. Prek's primary eyes narrowed. "The rings don't pulse." Uvax shrugged. "Sensor glitch, then." Prek flagged the disturbance anyway. "That's what they told us last time." Far beneath the surface of Enceladus, 30 kilometers deep, a ghost ship lay dormant. The command deck of the Vanguard Shadow glowed faintly under the cold shimmer of blue utility lights, their beams slicing through plumes of frost and vapor. A stillness hung thick in the air, dense with breath and waiting. Commander Reese Kalin stood motionless at the reinforced viewport, hands locked behind him. He hadn't spoken in hours. No one expected him to. Behind him, Jalen Voss monitored the sensor lattice, his voice calm but edged with readiness. Hostile contacts, none. Reese didn't turn. Proceed. Elevation sequence. Voss gave a sharp nod, transmitting the order via a deeply buried tactical frequency, one no galactic grid could sniff out. It had taken them 6 relentless years to dismantle the subphase encryption woven into the Ishari relay networks, and another grueling 5 to outbuild them. Far below, sealed bulkheads groaned as they parted. Deep within the frozen layers of Enceladus, ancient engines, powered by dark core fusion, roared to life. Silent giants awakening from hibernation. The vanguard shadow began its rise. It did not rise alone. Beneath Miranda's icy crust, and beyond the violent magnetic maelstrom circling Uranus, two colossal warforms, the Revenant and the Omen, ignited their thrusters in flawless harmony. Invisible to the Concorde's prying eyes, they ascended like phantoms from a war the galaxy had buried and forgotten. Constructed in secret, forged from stolen alloys and designs that never existed in any human archive. Reese's voice shattered the stillness, low, surgical. Vector. Voss's hands glided over the console. We breach stratosphere in 30 seconds. Saturn's rings will bury the surge signature. No ripple, no trace. At last, Reese pivoted to face him. Let's teach them the sound of silence. The deck rumbled faintly as the vanguard shadow pressed upward through the crystalline crust. On exterior feeds, the ice cracked and sheared, splintering like ancient bones beneath relentless force, scattering moonlight in fractured beams across the ship's matte obsidian skin, revealing nothing, revealing everything. For 2 decades, humanity had whispered. Now it was ready to speak. Far above, cargo leviathans coasted beneath alien insignias, convoys from a dozen species hauling pre-built colony nodes, atmosphere shapers, and bureaucratic envoys toward the azure world cradled near Sol's core. At the head of the formation, an immense freighter under the Varick cartel's banner lumbered forward, unarmed. None of them carried weapons. Why would they? Earth had fielded no defense fleet in over 20 years. Then the tremor came. It wasn't tectonic. It wasn't visible. But every deep space array flared crimson, just for a heartbeat, before cascading into silence. High above Titan, 3 forms bled from the ring shadows, blotting out the distant constellations. 3 dreadnoughts. No designations. No thermal signatures. No beacon codes. Only pure movement. Each warship stretched over 4 kilometers, draped in Terran design, but crossbred with alien tech pilfered from across the stars. Pitch-black hulls. Silent drift engines. Weapon clusters that no galactic archive could classify. Panic erupted across communication channels. Alien escorts scrambled for targeting solutions. Defense grids faltered. Auto-lock systems failed. Security encryptions collapsed. Identification beacons flipped themselves inside out. The fleet's comms dissolved into fractured signals. And then a voice. Clear. Controlled. Broadcast through every open band from Sol's Edge to the Concorde's relay spires on Charon's Reach. This is Commander Rescalen. Terra is not yours to seize. On Earth, streets in Nairobi flickered as fragmented feeds cut in and out. In Chicago, pedestrians froze mid-stride, heads tilting toward the towering public screens. In Beijing, alien-monitored factories slowed as their overseer interfaces dimmed, just for a moment. No alerts, no details, no explanation, only one truth echoing in their bones. The sentence surged across every channel. High above Rio de Janeiro, in the skeletal corridors of the orbital arcology, a maintenance tech named Lucan Maris froze mid-step. His wrench clattered to the floor as the holoscreen behind him cycled the transmission on endless repeat. That voice, that name, Kalen. The whispers ignited across ancient Terran war circuits like sparks in dry tinder. Kalen lives. Project Revenant was real. He had spoken, and now the stars could not unhear him. On the command deck of the Vanguard Shadow, Reese Kalen stood still, his face carved in the cold glow of tactical holoprojections. Voss remained at his side, silent, watching the ripples cascade through communication layers. Any reaction yet? Reese asked, voice sharp. Voss shook his head. Nothing so far, but they're tuned in. Reese turned back to the viewport where Earth shimmered faintly in the distance, a fragile blue ember against the void. Let them come. Let them challenge what 2 decades of silence have built. Because Earth never surrendered. Earth had been arming the silence. The dreadnoughts did not advance. They remained suspended, black titans looming over Saturn's rings, silent, unmoving, casting a terror that weighed far heavier than their size should allow. No shots fired. Yet whole fleets began to fracture, unraveling like systems forgetting how to be whole. The vanguard shadow, the revenant, and the omen drifted as dark sentinels amid the swirling debris fields. Their obsidian silhouettes cut sharper than the space around them. No weapons engaged. No shields lifted. No ultimatum spoken. Yet terror swept through the alien convoy hurtling toward Earth like wildfire through brittle leaves. Aboard the Vera cartel's lead freighter, the Zaraxis Vale, Commander Drexel Talker jolted forward in his grav-sling harness, his slender triple-jointed mandibles twitching in alarm. A regal-born Vecbrin, his polished ceremonial armor clicked ominously as he lunged toward his console. "Why haven't we locked targeting?" he barked, his voice sharp as broken glass. Telemetry's corrupted. The helmswoman snapped back. A wiry Vrothi with layered neck ridges and bio-threaded implants arching from her shoulders. The signals are fluctuating. We're caught in some recursive loop. Their echoes are bouncing back at us, distorting every scan. Talker's clawed limbs slammed into the panel. Force transponder override. All frequencies, maximum authority. A nearby officer, his voice frayed with panic, called out, "We're transmitting on every channel, sir. But the signals are being rewritten." Mid-broadcast. Our ship's beacon now pings as a local Terran supply vessel. Across the entire convoy, the same chaos unfolded. The Calvari lifeboat carrier Red Spire lost contact with its flanking guards. The Tezhari processing rig Kestel reported total navigational collapse. Its stellar positioning systems now showing Saturn in 3 conflicting sectors at once. On board the Varun envoy cruiser Orathil, dim auxiliary lights fluttered sporadically, while its onboard intelligence inexplicably rerouted power to phantom systems that did not exist. Not a single weapon had fired. Yet the convoy was neutralized, stripped of vision, silenced, disarmed. Talker spun toward his communications lead, mandibles clenching. "Are we under jamming assault?" The reply came slow, the officer's face pale, voice hollow. "No, Commander. Not jamming." The officer adjusted his comm rig, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're not jammed, we're being reflected. Every signal we push out bounces back, distorted, twisted. We're trapped in our own echo." Commander Talker's mandibles clicked tightly as he stared at the tactical screen. The dreadnoughts hadn't shifted a meter. Reports cascaded in from ship after ship, crew members experiencing phantom visuals, sensory overloads from recursive signal loops, pulsing lights syncing with the rhythm of their own heartbeats, navigation feeds sputtering fractured coordinates, strangely rendered in ancient Terra number systems. Drills were triggered. Emergency protocols initiated. But none of them worked. The fleet wasn't being fired upon. It was falling apart from within. "Transmit a distress code," Talker ordered, breath sharp with panic. "Full council alert. Mark code prime. This is a coordinated military breach." He didn't notice his own voice ghosting back to him. Half a second late, subtly warped. On the command bridge of the Vanguard Shadow, the air remained precise, clinical. No klaxons. No flashing indicators. Only the steady hum of self-regulating systems executing carefully layered infiltration patterns. Algorithms designed not to destroy, but to disassemble. Reese Kalen watched unmoving as the alien formation stalled, icons blinking, faltering, jittering across his tactical holosphere. "They've stopped advancing," noted Lieutenant Seb Marin, leaning into his station, eyes narrowed. "Looks like they don't even know where they are anymore." Further down the deck, Lieutenant Commander Tain Koran let out a low, amused breath. "They're twitchier than zero-G rookies on their first live sim. Bet this isn't the kind of resistance they were expecting." Marin's lips curled, darkly amused. Wouldn't even call it resistance. It's like watching someone chase their own shadow and vanish inside it. A ripple of smirks passed among the crew, a brief fracture in the tension. But Voss's voice cut through, cold and sharp. That's enough. The bridge snapped back to disciplined silence as he stepped forward, his gaze steely, his stance grounded like stone. If they still draw breath, they still carry teeth. Don't let their panic dull your edge. These ships fly banners from 10 Concord factions. Never forget the weight of what we face. The moment stretched. Marin dipped his head with a clipped nod, retreating. Tactical misstep, Commander. Apologies. Reese had expected it. Fleeting arrogance born from years spent in silence, starved for vindication. But this was no time for indulgence. His eyes never left the shimmering tactical grid. Our silence was deliberate. They convinced themselves we would abandon our cradle without a whisper. That false conviction was their fracture point. Voss glanced his way. Reese continued, steady as a pulse. They are caught off guard, but history's graveyards are stuffed with the bones of the overconfident. That won't be our epitaph. A pause. Measured. Settled. Voss inclined his head. Understood. The tension reset, discipline reforged. Beneath their watchful orbit, the alien fleet had all but stalled. Smaller ships drifted, breaking from formation. Their autopilot routines caught in endless spirals. Navigation cores unable to verify location or trajectory. Then, the first desperation signal bled beyond containment. This is Zirathil to Corey's command. Priority emergency. Terran warforms emerging. Unclassified vessel designs. Immediate reinforcements required. The message fractured, swallowed by static. Another fractured transmission clawed its way through the static, sizzling with broken code. We're being rewritten. I repeat, our command stacks are collapsing. AI structures compromised. This isn't protocol. Voss's eyes lifted from the relay console, his brow furrowed. That one pierced the net. Reese Kalen dipped his chin. Let them shout. Let the Concord hear every word. On the far edge of the galaxy, inside the black iron walls of the Onyx Citadel, where the Galactic Concord's high assembly ruled, the broadcast flickered across encrypted data streams, dancing on a dozen private holoscreens. A robed figure, skin like polished obsidian, glimmering fractal etchings spiraling across his scalp, leaned in. Chancellor Valic of the Mueller Syndicate narrowed 4 horizontal pupils. Terran disruption, he hissed. Beside him, Lord Barishkow, a thick-set Kesh aristocrat, scoffed loudly. That sector is neutralized. We ensured it. The Accord of Velis was signed by humans who have since disappeared. Disappeared, snapped Admiral Sun of the Jolth Ascendancy, his scaled jaw tightening with visible strain. We cannot rule by presumption. The chamber devolved into chaos, voices colliding in layered dialects, tones sharp, overlapping, indiscernible. Finally, Council Voice Jareth, draped in ivory robes, his towering crest shining beneath ancient glyphs, struck his command plate with a thunderous crack. Enough. Silence roared through the hall. Jareth rose, his angular visage lined with the weight of 3 centuries in power. They have executed a deliberate provocation. Treaty or not, this is a breach, an interference in Concord-sanctioned operations. The Sol territories must be stabilized. A vote was triggered. 17 factions responded in under 60 seconds. The decision was unanimous. Authorization granted. 40 warships deployed to Sol with immediate effect. They labeled it a stabilization fleet. Aboard the Vanguard Shadow, the tactical interface flickered. New icons materialized. Voss crossed his arms. Their transmissions just went dark. Reese nodded, his eyes cold and distant. They voted. His voice hardened. The Concord never argues for long. Arrogance blinds them to how much control they've already lost. The silence that followed gripped the bridge like ice. Tame Charon finally broke it. So they're really coming? 40 ships, Voss confirmed, eyes locked on the data stream. Heavy assault platforms, carrier class. 18 destroyers. The rest? Frigates, corvettes, escort packs. Reese scanned the scrolling fleet manifest. Not surprise, only confirmation. Good, he murmured. Let them come. His gaze shifted, his stance grounded, his voice sharp and unwavering. We haven't even moved yet. He pivoted from the screen. All stations, status reports. Prepare for Phase 2. A ripple of voices acknowledged. Steady, efficient. Defensive silence remains operational. We intercept nothing. We initiate no aggression. Not yet. Voss met his gaze, nodding once. Orders received. In the frozen orbit above Saturn, the dreadnoughts remained still, blackened scars suspended in the abyss. Unmoving, waiting. And the galaxy marched blindly toward them. Far beyond Sol's outer veil, the fabric of space shivered, fold layers rupturing as something colossal carved its way through the dark. The Concorde's answer had begun to arrive. Fold space ruptured, a silent convulsion, like the universe itself had been slashed open along Sol's rim. Out of the Cairo's expanse, far beyond Neptune's ghostly arc, a vortex of electrified vacuum pulsed into existence, blazing for a heartbeat before settling into a spiraling maw. One by one, the Concorde's warships emerged. Their hulls shimmered beneath flickering diplomatic insignias, wrapped in distortion veils that bent heat and light into fractured waves. Their drives burned cold, their engines roaring with a restrained, seething ferocity. 40 ships in all. The Vanguard, the Veileth Sovereign, flanked by twin Mithril-class carriers and a lethal weave of escort destroyers, each vessel slicing through the black with brutal precision. The remaining fleet drifted across 7 staggered approach corridors, linking navigational lattices across dozens of species, a synthetic combat tapestry woven on the fly. Within the bridge of the Sovereign, Admiral Kelvin Voss paced deliberately, his 6-finger hands clasped behind his back. A noble-born Jalith. His scarlet uniform shimmered faintly under the pulse of kinetic barrier fields. His elongated, serpentine face betrayed nothing beneath the weight of his golden command crown. Deploy forward scouts, he ordered, voice low but crisp. Scatter drone swarms into the inner system. I want visual and gravitational telemetry on every celestial body, station, and artifact within 12 astronomical units. At once, Admiral, his second-in-command replied, a threnic hybrid with sunken eye sockets and coiled neural strands threading down his spine. The orders rippled outward. 12 seconds later, 64 autonomous recon drones erupted from multiple launch bays, arcing toward the asteroid belt at full thrust. Not a single one returned. Kelvin's brow tensed. Transmission lag. Negative, sir. The Threnic officer replied quickly, sifting through raw signal reports. No debris, no residual wake, just gone. On the central holodisplay, the asteroid field flickered, grayscale overlays shuddering. Then the whole display blacked out. Inside the Vanguard Shadow's control chamber, faint glows marked the positions of obliterated probe signals. Each missing drone had vanished precisely, instantaneous, localized, intentional. Reese Kalen rested one hand lightly against the chilled rail along the deck's edge. Voss was already on it. Concorde scouts neutralized. 0 alerts triggered. The net caught the mid-jump. They're cycling fake telemetry, Voss added. Feedback loops in place before collapse. They don't realize they're already blind. Reese studied the incoming vector webs. They're pushing hard. Maximum burn. 5 distinct species, formations converging. No layered waves. No tactical spread. They're charging, Voss muttered. Exactly as we projected, Reese said evenly. He stepped to the primary control node and swept both hands across the interface, awakening a dormant layer beneath the main projection. A ripple of crimson pathways cascaded across the outer system map. Static beacons, ghost signals, falsified echo points, interference traps ready to ignite. Activate the dissonance arrays. Set 3. Begin with signal haze. Then drop the maze. Voss's fingers danced across the console. Deploying now. Initiating frequency pulse gradients, sectors alpha 1 through beta 9. Across the system's edge, space itself fractured. The outer layers of space began to ripple, subtle but devastating. Council destroyers stationed along the fleet's perimeter reported sudden spatial tremors. Their navigation cores recalculated 3 times within 5 seconds. Starfix overlays twisted. Gravitational signatures of nearby planets distorted, warping as if invisible masses pressed against them. On board the Gravitha's Blade, a Krenari cruiser, Captain Zalith Karn slammed his clawed appendage into his console. Where is the Juno beacon? It's drifting 302 AU off anchor. This isn't orbital drift. Aboard the Valeth Sovereign, Admiral Kelverin's voice cut sharp through the comms. Scatter formation. Full sublight expansion. We are inside an engineered distortion field. He was right. The entire fleet was encased, trapped inside a layered cage of gravitational manipulation, shaped like the hollowed shell of a minefield. Yet none of the mines detonated. Confusion spread like cracks in glass. Whispered orders. Ships hesitating. Lines fraying. Aboard the Vanguard Shadow, Voss leaned in over his console. 3 sectors destabilized. Fold exit points collapsing. They're starting to splinter. Rhys Kalen's nod was measured. Perfect. Seal their retreat lanes. No direct hits. At his command, human-engineered relay nodes, disguised as frozen debris, activated in eerie silence. Pulse disruptors and fold space dampeners came online in rhythmic succession. Council ships attempting to chart withdrawal vectors instead found themselves plunging into thick signal fog. Destroyers from the forward strike line scrambled to recalibrate. Several lost sync across formation grids. One cruiser veered 20 degrees off course, slamming into an old resource satellite orbiting a defunct comet, crippling its dorsal thrusters. Rhys tracked it without blinking. Stripped their infrastructure. No casualties. In the shadow of Venus, long-abandoned Terran satellite arrays flickered to life. Outdated, but modified with alien circuitry salvaged from Jalith smuggler fleets years prior. These satellites emitted precision ghost pulses, tight beams that wormed into power hubs, coolant links, and command chain junctions. Within minutes, 3 Concorde carriers reported catastrophic failures rippling across their outer weapon scaffolds. Commander called Lieutenant Saren Koig, his eyes wide as he parsed the tactical storm. They aren't under fire. They're just collapsing. They've been boxed in, Rhys answered without hesitation. Push deeper. Feed them chaos. Voss triggered the secondary program across 3 drift sectors near the asteroid belt. Synthetic wreckage arrays deployed. Holographic fragments resembling shattered council ships, pre-scripted distress signals, and simulated communication loops. Every detail crafted to suggest a disastrous battle against an unseen adversary. Rhys added one final twist. Inject the comm traffic in Trellan dialect. Make it sound like they've been betrayed from within. Marin's smirk returned. That'll burn. Moments later, encrypted council battlenets erupted in frantic bursts. We were ambushed. Rear formation breached. No traceable enemy signatures, just shadows. Aboard the Valeth Sovereign, Kelverin's jaw clenched, his composure buckling for the first time. They're trying to fracture our cohesion, he snarled. Scrub the channels. Block all signals below Admiralty grade. But the infection had already taken root. On board the Caloran Interceptor, Sulker's Talon, formation integrity fractured. The crew, paralyzed by paranoia, pinged an active targeting scan across the Delaroon Dreadnought, a supposed ally. The web was tearing itself apart. The Delaroon dreadnought fired without warning, without pause. Blazing plasma arcs ripped across Allied hulls, searing through armor with brutal precision as what little remained of their discipline shattered like brittle ice. Voss's tone stayed level. "We never touched them." Reese Kalin gave a single nod. "We didn't need to." Koig muttered under his breath, barely audible. "They're falling apart faster than we projected." "Not fast enough," Reese murmured, his eyes sweeping the tactical grid. "They still think they can pull themselves together." "They still believe it's salvageable," Voss observed, narrowing his gaze. "Don't push yet," Reese said flatly. "Let them convince themselves the chaos is internal, that all they need is tighter control across the system." The trap flexed, but did not spring. It breathed. It waited. The dreadnoughts held their silence, watching, listening. The war hadn't even started. But now the Council had seen something move in the dark. And nightmares always begin in shadows. The fractured fleet descended into Jupiter's upper atmosphere under a thick hush. What scraps of their formations remained now hovered in loose disarray. Thrusters vented waste heat into the gas giants' furious magnetic fields. Their hulls, battered and scorched from phantom crossfire, drifted in barely maintained positions. Admiral Kelvran's standing order pulsed across the fractured comms. "Regroup. Stabilize above Jovian orbit. Reassert control." But Jupiter did not welcome them. No sooner had the fleet locked orbital paths than the disturbances deepened. The magnetic turbulence intensified into spasmodic ripples. Oxygen scrubbers across 13 vessels spasmed, collapsing under phantom loads. Plasma reservoirs flickered wildly aboard every Jalith warship. On the sensor arrays, the volcanic plumes of Io suddenly pulsed in synchronized patterns, unnatural, almost rhythmic. "This isn't real gravity," growled Commander THR from the Sovereign's tactical pit, his neural implants pulsing dangerously as light bled from his overstressed ocular strands. "It's synthetic, modulated, artificial." "That's impossible," snapped strategist Dralmak aboard the carrier Valaxis 14. "Nothing in this quadrant is capable of manipulating gravitational harmonics at this scale." Then Valaxis 14's shielding collapsed, not from enemy fire, but from catastrophic coolant failures cascading beneath its own skin. The moons weren't idle witnesses. They were biting. Beneath Ganymede's glacial shell, 70 kilometers beneath the crust, a forgotten Terran facility roared to life. No windows. No beacons. Constructed inside the gutted veins of an abandoned Jovian mining array. The world knew it only as grid echo. For nearly 7 years it had slept, its fusion core buried beneath hardened ice, its command team rotated in total silence under blackout protocols. Today, its purpose was finally waking. At the nexus of the cold-lit chamber, Colonel Theo Nabar stood atop a raised hexagonal platform encircled by 6 active control consoles. Operators moved with mechanical efficiency, dressed in black composite suits without insignias, without rank markings, faceless, nameless. Only Nabar wore a single emblem, a silver triangular pin pressed to his left breast. His voice, calm and deliberate, pierced the sterile air. "Leviathan Command, confirm." "Track drift on vector, sector Delta 7, Colonel Nabar ordered, his tone smooth as ice. A technician's reply came instantly. "Confirmed." Trio of Concord destroyers now traversing a blind vector. Distance optimal. Nabar stepped toward a recessed control node, activating a buried lattice. Across Ganymede's frozen underbelly, slender cylindrical towers silently ascended through the fractured ice. Each unit, no larger than a freight crate, appeared dormant to exterior scans, mimicking frozen geological formations, but their cores pulsed with kinetic life. Inside, a synchronized network of spin-coupled inertia drivers awakened. No projectiles, no payloads, just pure momentum, folded and manipulated. The first kinetic surge rippled skyward. High above, The Delaroon frigate Kessions, Thorn jerked violently to port. Its stabilizers attempted correction, but the torque didn't align with any gravitational source. The second pulse hit. The bow twisted 30 degrees off axis, just as a Jovian radiation flare pierced its weakened shields. The ship faltered, engines flickering, before slipping into cold silence. No explosions, no collisions, just annihilation by a movement no longer tethered to natural physics. Ganymede Vector 1 is fully locked, another technician reported. Local distortion stabilized. Override duration, 6 minutes at peak output. Nabar crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering on the spherical tactical globe above. To his right, a secondary lattice came alive, this one embedded deep beneath the Marius Ridge. Once an ancient oceanic plate, now a repurposed maze of forgotten human tunnels. Buried helium. 3 cores powered massive thermal projection grids, their conduits reinforced by Wishram superconductor threads. Contraband from smuggled supply routes a decade past. The system pulsed artificial heat echoes, thermal phantoms designed to mislead combat scanners and lock on AIs. Across Quadrant 2, 2 Concorde cruisers adjusted their course. One fired into empty void, the other discharged a torpedo that spiraled into Jupiter's upper atmosphere and vanished. "Activate the ghost projectors," Nabar commanded, his voice like stone. "Engage full grid. Layer all surface emissions with tertiary pulse overlays." The final sequence engaged. Deep beneath Ganymede's crust, colossal cryogenic capacitors released decades of hoarded electromagnetic charge in a cascading rhythm, a pulse that simulated the very resonance of the Moon's planetary core. Above, Concorde ships lost not just signals, but the very certainty of what existed beneath them. Nothing above Ganymede had a stable mass echo. Every target now reflected infinite possibilities, a labyrinth of mirrored ghosts. "They've got no eyes on us now," one technician whispered. "They can't even confirm we're beneath them anymore." Nabar didn't answer. He simply watched as the crimson fleet marker slid, staggered, and spun wildly across the interface. Chaos blooming overhead, while surgical precision reigned below. Aboard the Vanguard Shadow, the tactical overlay twisted again, Jupiter's vast crimson sphere looming behind tangled engagement grids. Rhys Kalin observed as the Concorde fleet icons flickered, stuttered, and fractured. "They're clawing for stability near Io's orbit," Voss noted, his readings tight and fast. Sensor array logs, 10 ships lost. Vector cohesion gone. "Forward battle groups are collapsing," Voss reported. "Their advance is in complete disarray." "Status on Ganymede's interference lattice?" Rhys Kalin asked, eyes locked on the shifting grid. "Fields fully active," Voss replied. They walked straight into the storm, completely blind. Rhys's expression never changed. Voss kept scanning the feed. Multiple shield arrays collapsing across their formations. Io's electromagnetic spikes are jamming their short-range tactical bandwidth. Europa just obliterated an entire carrier's command net using signal bounce-back. He paused, meeting Rhys's gaze. "We can seize their nerve center." Rhys didn't answer. Voss stepped in, his voice low but urgent. "If we deploy the Oblivion, we can sever their coordination spine. Cut their command layers apart before they realign. We don't need full engagement. Just shatter their core." Rhys turned toward him, sharp. "You're certain it'll lock the sector within 40 seconds of pulse deployment?" "Yes," Voss said, steady. "We can carve out everything north of Callisto's orbit." Rhys nodded once. "Perfect. Summon the Oblivion. Full spectrum broadcast suppression. Prepare the black signal." High above Uranus's swirling maelstrom, the Oblivion, the third dreadnought, awakened. Its cloak peeled away, the behemoth slipping from silent orbit into dark burn. Its hull didn't gleam. It devoured light, devoured sound, devoured code. It was not built to attack. It was built to erase. Sliding into approach near the Jovian front line, the Oblivion cracked open its signal bays, releasing 12 synchronized interference nodes, sleek black javelins, each the length of a gunship. They surged forward on plasma-boosted vectors toward Concorde formations. They did not explode. They pulsed, resonating a deep harmonic fracture that slashed across tactical comm layers. The Concorde fleet, spread across 5 species encryption networks, suddenly lost structural cohesion. Battle AIs collapsed into emergency manual overrides. One command cruiser received 5 conflicting orders simultaneously from its own command node. Formation scattered. Aboard the Valeth Sovereign, Admiral Kelvrin's bark echoed across the dying control nets. Control Node 3 is dark. Reroute through Sovereign Prime. Silence. No answer. Then worse, 2 cruisers, Grathan Spire and Talvritha's Edge, both Delaroon class, drifted into the same distortion ripple. Sensor ghosts bled into each other. Talvritha's Edge misidentified its ally as an enemy and opened fire. The blast sheared through both hulls, ripping them open, hurling them in a death spiral toward Jupiter's edge. No stabilization, no recovery. They vanished, consumed by fire and pressure. Aboard the Vanguard Shadow, Lieutenant Coig's face remained still, his eyes calmly tracking the disaster. 2 more cruisers down. Friendly fire. They can't tell which signals are real anymore. Reese stepped closer to the broadcast console. Transmit the phrase. Voss initiated the command sequence. Confirmed. 12 seconds later, across fractured bandwidths and flickering HUDs, Concorde crews began to see it, laser-etched into drifting debris, spray-painted onto shattered council hull fragments, flashing across hijacked relay nodes orbiting Umla. One phrase, repeating, relentless, you were never in control. Not of us. Not of this place. Not anymore. Aboard the Kalinari destroyer Drespec, a junior comms officer stared at the message, his hands trembling. The words pulsed across his HUD, the message repeating like a ghost. Each letter flickered, erasing one interface after another. We're being rewritten. The comms officer choked out, panic tightening his throat. No systems responding. Aboard the Valeth Sovereign, Admiral Kelvrin clenched his jaw. Track the source. It's not a source, THR growled, his sockets bleeding faint white light. It's not a signal. It's buried in the Cascade fallback. They designed it this way. Kelvrin's fists trembled against the railing. Then we kill the Echo. Pull every ship to high orbit. Regroup beyond Callisto's shadow. Sir, a new voice cut in strained. Navigation is gone. Callisto's echo grid just activated. We can't confirm the moon's actual coordinates. Beneath Ganymede's crust, Colonel Nabar observed as the enemy fleet fractured even further. The comms officer to his left whispered, "Should we press now?" Nabar didn't blink. No. The commander sets the tempo. Back aboard the Vanguard Shadow, the tactical grid displayed an unraveling masterpiece. Collapse spreading like cracks through glass. They can't sync the front and rear, Voss muttered. Both ends of their line are operating on different NAV maps. Reinforcements are pinging ghost targets, Coig added. Coordinates don't exist. Reese Kalen's breath slipped out, soft, deliberate. Their core. Voss scrolled through chaotic telemetry. Splintered. Command nets severed. Half their vessels have no idea the others are still intact. Reese kept watching, cold, still. Hold fire. Let them break themselves. The human dreadnoughts lingered like obsidian scars against the void, silent, still, terrifying. No salvos launched. No shields raised. Their presence alone forced the enemy to scramble, hunting exits that had never existed. After the catastrophic failure at Jupiter, Concorde forces diverted wide, veering toward the inner system, scattered and unsensed. Fragmented, they sought the only refuge they could, proximity. Proximity led them to Venus. Admiral Kelvrin, bloodied but stubborn, demanded a corridor be carved toward the second planet. He would bypass the outer chaos, anchor his fleet there, What he didn't understand, what none of them had realized, was that every planet in the system had been prepared. Venus had been waiting the longest. The first carrier, Velmari Obsidian, crossed into Venusian orbit. Within seconds, heat signatures along its hull flared, spiking beyond critical. On the Vanguard Shadow, Koig's board lit up. Thermal surge on target ship, Venus trajectory. Reese turned slightly, his voice steady. Source. Automated platforms, Koig replied. Buried inside the atmosphere. Probably old UEDF black site sentries, reactivated. Voss was already dissecting the readings. They were triggered by direct descent burns, deep approach vectors. They're using folded thermals to warp momentum mid-drop. That carrier's falling wrong, Voss added. Clarify, Reese said, calm as stone. Thrusters are fighting phantom vectors. They believe Venus shifted beneath them. On screen, the Velmari Obsidian spun 32 degrees off its stabilizers. Starboard engines overcompensated, overheated, then imploded. Hull plating groaned, twisted, then peeled like wet parchment. The ship didn't detonate. It liquefied. Nearby, the Concorde warship Feljoan attempted a desperate counter-thrust, braking hard above the orbital plane. That's when the second snare detonated. Gravitational dilation. Graviton burst, Koig reported, his tone taut. Pinpointed fold snare. Venus sector. Station 4. Beneath the planet's thick, reflective clouds, shrouded on the unlit hemisphere, 3 forsaken human outposts stirred. Automated. Forgotten. Hidden in the haze. They didn't send signals. They didn't track targets. They twisted space itself. Every 11 seconds, like a heartbeat, each sent out a soft gravitational pulse, timed perfectly to the planet's curvature. The Feljoan scanners struggled to compute. They returned with 3 positional locks for a single object. None matched. No guidance system could settle. The cruiser's stabilizers misfired mid-maneuver. It spiraled, tore itself apart, crumpling into pieces as Reese Kalen watched, impassive. But desperation breeds evolution. The Concorde wouldn't simply recoil. The Delaroon gunship Calder's blade darted beneath the distortion shell, skimming the lower atmosphere, fast and sharp. It found something. A residual heat bloom. A faint human power signature buried near the Venusian surface. An outpost. It fired. Inside Relay Theta 9, Commander Alenko Varek was already mid-comm dispatch when the first impact struck. Metal walls groaned. Pressure conduits buckled. The deck split as emergency klaxon screamed. Half a second too late. Varek didn't freeze. He yanked 2 junior engineers toward a reinforced chute, his voice cutting through the alarms. Vent heat now. You'll spike the grid if you don't. The second barrage ripped through the upper structure, directly above the reactor. The floor sagged. Varek shoved the engineers into the escape conduit, then turned back toward the relay control, just as the ceiling collapsed. He didn't make it through. Above the swirling clouds, the station's frame twisted inward. The comm signal flickered, then vanished into a silent burst of molten fragments. Inside the Vanguard Shadow, the alert tone chimed without ceremony. Confirmed loss, Voss said quietly. Theta 9 has been erased. Koig's voice followed, muted. Alenko Varek was on site. He was coordinating the salvage crew. No one spoke. Reese didn't blink. He stood motionless as seconds passed, the weight of the room pressing down. Then his voice sliced the silence. Trace their firing vector. Tag that gunship. Assign a direct kinetic response from the Artemis vault. Koig hesitated. Sir, it's not a battlecraft. It's a retrofitted courier. Weak shielding. Reese didn't waver. Assign it. The order moved fast, faster than grief could catch them. 24 seconds later, a human-launched kinetic spear fired from a hollowed-out mining structure orbiting inside Mercury's helioline. Silent, undetectable, unstoppable. Calder's blade never saw it. The projectile punched clean through her spine, threading the gunship like fabric. She tumbled once and ceased. Inside the vanguard shadow, silence pressed like stone. Voss approached, voice tight. "Sir, Theta's team, that was Commander Varick's post." Reese didn't turn. They were forward logistics, never meant to be in direct line of fire. His jaw twitched once, barely. "The Concorde just taught us they can learn. They're adjusting." The weight in the air thickened, coiled around them. No one moved. Voss's voice dropped lower. "Alenko believed victory meant nothing if we didn't preserve something human in the fight." Reese answered, his words like gravel. "Maybe something human remains." His gaze stayed cold, fixed forward. But peace isn't won with an open hand. For a long breath, Durrance stayed silent. When his words finally came, they were almost a whisper. He always said, there had to be another path. Reese Kalen didn't glance away from the tactical grid. And that's why he was the first to fall. His tone was flint. Because mercy walks slower than wildfire. The chamber froze. No grins now. No hushed aids. Only the soft flicker of command holograms and the crushing weight of that lesson. Durrance retreated to his console. Coig said nothing. Marlowe didn't stir. They understood. Beyond, Venus glimmered, unmoved. Its perpetual storms coiled like sleeping serpents, cloaking the reawakened satellites veiled by phantom code, guarding weapons crafted not for valor, but for slow, patient destruction. The Concorde's gamble to sidestep this theater had collapsed, and Reese Kalen had inched closer to his own brutal design. The next trigger was subtle, jagged and frantic, like a rushed distress ping. A scrambled request for emergency logistical clearance, allegedly from a human-forward depot near Martian orbit. Surrounded by falsified relay echoes and an emergency beacon lifted from a vessel that had ceased to exist 4 years prior. Deliberately imperfect, deliberately irresistible, the Concorde seized it. After their Venus debacle, their need for victory twisted into hunger. They sought firm ground, some symbolic foothold to prove dominance. Mars, ripe, central, resource-rich. It shimmered in their desperation. It looked abandoned, exposed, vulnerable. They lunged. More than 60% of their remaining forces pivoted hard, burning vectors straight toward the red world. No hesitation, no reconnaissance, just raw velocity. Aboard the Vanguard shadow, Reese Kalen remained still as he watched the Concorde fleet swarm toward Mars. His voice was quiet. Confirm status. Coig nodded. Enemy ships initiating low orbit insertion, clustering along the equatorial line. Heaviest convergence near Ares sector. They've all committed. Durrance moved closer, reviewing the overlay. They're reading that abandoned station as pivotal. No resistance flagged. No defense grids. They think we're collapsing. Coig added, they see weakness. Reese never blinked. Good. Let them. Typhon Relay 3, officially retired 10 years prior, had been subtly repurposed. Its transmission net carefully reignited, just enough to bait. Its shield halo powered partially. Its docking hatch set ajar. A perfect crack in the door. Durrance worked the layered projections. 5 spheres aligned. Ceres, Nuno, Enceladus, Europa, Titan, all syncing with Martian trajectory. Final calibration stable. Reese pivoted. Ground teams. Phase 1 complete. Red sectors fully under control. Olympus Mons, Arcadia Base, Borealis site, all secured. Gamma squads locked across Valles Marineris. Beneath the Martian soil, hidden strongholds came alive. Special operations units, ghost soldiers honed through Black Ops since the fall of Juno, were already coiled in waiting beneath crucial fault lines. They weren't armed for pitched battle. They were crafted to fracture, to unmake. Saboteurs primed to collapse orbital anchors from beneath the crust. Signal architects ready to blind entire fleets with silent flickers. Railgun tacticians positioned to pierce propulsion arrays through rock strata. Colonel Traven Rohr, field commander for the Marineris insurgents, keyed the final activation codes from a subterranean vault carved into the belly of ancient basalt. His voice cracked across the closed circuit, sharp and focused, all vectors locked. Mars is set. The Council Armada's descent toward Mars began to fracture, slivers of time peeling away from cohesion. Milliseconds drifted into seconds, then minutes. Fleet synchronization cracked like brittle glass. Weapons fired into empty voids. Auto-targeting arrays spun toward phantom stars. Cohesion unraveled. Quietly, mercilessly. Defense systems locked onto mirrored specters. Command bridges lost all planetary reference. And above them, still as the grave, the Vanguard, Shadow, waited. Durance leaned closer to the display. They're trapped. Our axis holds. They've lost Mars. Rhys Kalen's gaze didn't flicker. Then we wait. On Phobos, the decoy breach pulsed steadily, like a heart beating inside a dead body. The enemy surged forward, snapping into tighter formations, jaws closing around the waiting dreadnought. 14 vessels advanced directly, weapons primed, targeting grids aligned. 30 more spiraled wide, sealing Mars in a suffocating ring. Inside the Vanguard Shadow, silence. No words, no movements. Every subsystem primed. Every sequence aligned. The jaws of the trap were set. Rhys Kalen stood poised at the central interface, eyes tracking the final enemy vessels crossing the convergence boundary. A single glance to Durance. Execute. Durance nodded once. Pulse armed. Triangulation secured. He keyed the final sequence. 3, 2, 1. Rhys's voice sliced through, low and sharp. Fire. There was no explosion. No flash. Just a suffocating stillness. As though the entire solar system had paused, lungs full but refusing to exhale. 3 deep space transmitters activated simultaneously. One buried within the dense rock of Ceres, another beneath Neptune's cold magnetic crust, and the last hidden inside the fusion lattice beneath Enceladus. The Leviathan network pulsed. Not light, not sound. Collapse. Perfectly synchronized collapse. Mars folded, reality rippled, snapping the logic of space. Instantly, Council ships lost their grip on direction. Gravitational vectors dissolved, not by push, not by pull, but by dislocation. Engines stable for hours now misfired against non-existent anchors. On board the Jet-Har Ascendant, Admiral Vern's tactical grid looped wildly. Mars flickered beneath them, then staggered 300 kilometers portside, then vanished. Locks lost, a Salkyrie helmsman shrieked. Drive commands non-responsive, coordinate fields collapsing. Emergency stabilizers offline. Varun roared, but no command sequence answered. Systems bled light. Gravity inverted. Artificial atmospheres imploded under self-created vacuums. Some vessels spun slowly, sickeningly. Others simply dropped, inert, dead stones adrift in Martian orbit. On board the ULT Marek, General Olivac clawed at manual controls. His second, Kershborn, suffered a catastrophic collapse of his internal compensators. His chest cavity crushed inwards, spine folding as though his body had imploded from within. He was gone before he touched the deck. Aboard the Velmari Shard, a Mathel war core fragmented from recursive data feedback. 11 emergency restarts collapsed the core, obliterating the ship's stern in a silent bloom. There were no war cries, no gun duels, just ships dying, just systems going dark. Inside the Vanguard Shadow, Durance's voice remained surgical. Phase complete. Gravitational distortions locked. Enemy fleet immobilized. Shields collapsed. Weapon grids unresponsive. Koig watched the board flicker. They're not falling. They're frozen. Rhys Kalen stepped forward, his voice like flint. Target the flagship. The dreadnought's primary rails came alive, compression coils humming softly as the barrels aligned. No flash. No sound. A single kinetic rod launched, silent and pure, crossing the void in less than a heartbeat. It carved through the Jet-Har ascendant spine, cleaving the flagship like a blade through bone. No explosion, just a slow, silent peel, as if the ship had been quietly unstitched. The front spun once, detached from a keel, and drifted toward Mars' upper atmosphere. A broken relic falling in silence. Durance's voice returned, flat and final. Flagship eliminated. Only once had he spoken at Saturn. Silence had done the rest. Transmit nothing, Reese said quietly. Let the silence speak for us. Panic erupted across the enemy bands. Council vessels fired wildly, blind and desperate, plasma streams slicing through empty skies. Some shot their own escorts. On the Simoth, a Delarun command cruiser, 5 officers screamed over one another as lights flickered from crimson to pale green in erratic pulses. A Tekshar signal officer retched violently into his rebreather, his cranial pressure collapsing balance, slamming face first onto the deck. Avdrathi Helm Master clawed at his own helmet as the stars spun out of control. His last words lost, not to silence, but to static. He died knowing none of his training mattered. No one noticed the hull rupture until half the ship was gone. Inside the Vanguard shadow, Koig murmured, their broadcasting distress beacons, Sakari, Delarun, Kershborn Mathel, all of them. Durance's voice cut in. There's no one coming. Reese's gaze never moved. There never was. The tactical field bled red. Enemy icons stuttering, blinking, vanishing one by one. No flashes. No blasts. Just systems dying quietly. One destroyer near Phobos simply winked out, its lights fading like a lonely house going dark in the distance. Koig whispered, almost disbelieving, they don't even know what's killing them. Kill them. Koig whispered. No, Reese Kalen answered, his voice sharp as glass. That's not the point. On the fractured display, a Kanari gunship spun helplessly, then winked out like a dying spark. A Jolith cruiser splintered against the hull of its own escort corvette, their twisted remains spiraling into the void. 2 Council frigates drifted too close to Mars, caught in the planet's grasp. Silent, they burned, disintegrating wordlessly as they fell through the thin atmosphere. The last transmission arrived, fragmented, desperate, from a minor Tecker scout craft. Garbled static, systems collapsing, propulsion frozen. Please, anyone, our coordinates collapsing. We're not. Silence. Durance stood still, watching the final red icon fade from the board. Sector clear, he reported. Reese lowered his hand. No survivors? Koig asked, half statement, half uncertainty. No return signals, Durance confirmed. They're gone. Reese stared at the now empty tactical field. Then let them remember nothing. No faces, no flag, just the silence that erased them. Beyond the cold glass, Mars hung quietly, untouched. The void that had roared now whispered, black, waiting, still. The Vanguard shadow held position. No victory codes, no beacon flashes, just a dark, silent shape orbiting the silence it had become. And the silence didn't fade. It lingered. It endured. It became its own message. After the final red icon vanished, after the enemy fleet evaporated, nothing else appeared. No reinforcements emerged from fold space. No command hails. No scans, no return fire. The stillness around Mars remained absolute. But it didn't feel like peace. It felt like a warning. Inside the Vanguard shadow, systems idled in low-power standby. Reese Kalen remained at the observation window, hands folded behind his back, his reflection swallowed by the black outside. Behind him, the bridge crew waited, silent. No one moved to speak. Durance finally stepped forward, his eyes on the static telemetry feed. There's movement. Reese didn't turn. Define it. Far edge of the gravity shell. 6, maybe 8 vessels. Peripheral fleet remnants. Detached from core command. They're not advancing, Durance added. They're leaving. On the display, A thin string of alien ships, scouts, logistics cruisers, and one wounded frigate peeled away from Mars orbit. No weapon grids active. No formation integrity. No broadcasts. Just a quiet retreat. Koig glanced up from his console. They're ignoring the distress calls. Not even responding to their own wounded. They're not survivors, Durrance said flatly. They're witnesses. Reese's voice remained cold. Good. 12 hours later, the silence broke, but not where they expected. Across the galactic comnet, the first intercepted emergency hail leaked. A raw, unfiltered slice of terror broadcast during the collapse. It was chaos. A tangle of overlapping cries from dozens of dialects, none complete, none coherent, none carrying any thread of hope. The signals had been buried in encrypted fail-safes, deep backup bands most never scanned. But someone found them, extracted them, aligned the fragments, and released them uncut into the interstellar grid. The first clip spread like a contagion. 10 seconds of static. Then, this is Vish Command Orbital Wing 3, Fleet's disintegrated unknown spatial event. No response from Ascendant or Coronet. Repeat, this is not a tactical loss. We are being dismantled. By the time it reached the second-tier comnet layers, those regulated by the Galactic Council, it had already gone viral. 6 major trade hubs carried the signal. Pirate nodes amplified it. Neutral systems, with no love for council governance, blasted it across unrestricted feeds. Translation overlays flooded in, quick, brutal, incomplete. We were dismantled. The phrase echoed across war channels and commerce bands alike. Not defeated, not outgunned, dismantled. Panic rippled through outer colonies. Council sympathizers questioned fleet integrity. Military nodes raced to contain the narrative, but containment was impossible. Because the message wasn't just about Mars. It was about something the Council couldn't explain. It wasn't a battle. It was a disappearance. Ships, command layers, entire formations gone. No gunfire. No orbital bombardments. No captured prisoners. Just empty space. And the most terrifying thing of all, there was no image, no flag, no face, nothing to blame, only silence. Reese Kalin had crafted the perfect ghost. A silence that would echo across the stars. A silence that would outlast memory. A silence no one could ever explain. Cultures shattered. And then the second leak detonated across the galactic net. A wideband distress fragment ripped from the Valmer shard, cut mid-transmission as its AI core collapsed. Reality is wrong. Targets flicker. Gravity's breaking. Structures twisting from inside. We can't. By the 15th hour, the Council could no longer contain the spread. Emergency sessions convulsed into existence within the obsidian spires of the Carthan Nexus, the central citadel of the Galactic Concord. Panic devoured the cold traditions of diplomacy. The ancient sigils of 17 species glared above their stations, but the chamber no longer resonated with precision. It roared, fragmented, desperate, layered with frantic translations and scrambled comms as old alliances scrambled to comprehend the magnitude of their collapse. At the heart of the storm, Counselor Jorek of the Drelethi Alliance stood rigid, mandibles locked in trembling silence. This was never meant to be a war. His voice cracked under the weight of the room. We enforced a logistical sanction, not triggered systemic annihilation. Across from him, Counselor Melrith of the Jalek Compact remained perfectly still, for black reptilian eyes tracking the rising panic. His words cut through the frenzy, cold and clear. We miscalculated the scale of silence. Their fleets were scattered 20 cycles ago, snapped Koresh Counselor Varen, his twin voices laced with disbelief. They were fractured, rudderless, barely a species, let alone a threat. And then from a highest tier, a new voice descended, measured, old, bound with terrible weight. Counselor Eler Drain of the Mathari Consortium. We miscalculated humanity. The statement thundered across the spire. No one challenged it. No one applauded. The silence that followed wasn't political, it was instinct. Out in Seoul, no signals left Earth's orbit. The Vanguard Shadow, the Phantom Leviathan, and the Oblivion's Edge held their positions over Mars and Saturn, still as stone guardians. Their hulls remained dark. Systems idled in low power, like the cold embers of a fire no one dared to stir. Inside the Vanguard, no scanner swept. No tactical feeds hummed. The bridge was silent except for the soft glow of auxiliary power, an ambient blue that carved long shadows across the steel decks. Reese Kalin sat alone, not at the command interface, but near the aft viewport. The stars beyond shimmered, untouched. The planet below hung in quiet indifference. Durrance stood near the darkened tactical rail, arms crossed. Neither man had spoken for long minutes. Then Reese's voice, quiet and final, broke the silence. Let them spread what they saw. Durrance's voice followed, low, and let them think twice before coming back. They both turned toward the glass again. No sensors, no data, just memory. Behind them, the Vanguard's core remained silent. Around them, the void remained still. And far in the distance, small and blue, untouched, unnoticed, Earth continued its slow, deliberate turn. Hey there, traveler among the stars. What did you think of this story? Drop me a comment below. I really want to know your take on it. Whether the deep dive, a simple hi, or even your wildest theory, I'd love to hear from you. Oh, and hey, before you drift off to your next adventure, remember, every great soldier knows survival starts with taking care of yourself. Check the pinned comment. It's something I picked just for you. And yeah, I've lined up your next mission. Click right here or right here for the next part or the full playlist. Catch you in the silence.